Okay. Morning everyone and welcome to our webinar on student motivation. My name's Laura Lichtensteiger, and I'll be hosting our discussion today along with my colleague Stuart.
Hi there, my name's Stuart Webster. I'm the Digital Solutions Manager at Cengage Learning. So I'm here just to help things move along and hopefully engage with you all in this discussion today. Just to give you a few pieces or hints and tips for engaging most effectively with the webinar today. We will be putting up some poll questions, so keep an eye on the screen. You will need to click some answers and that's some poll questions shortly. And if you want to chat with us or let us know your thoughts or ideas, there is a chat room at the bottom of your screen. So if you could all just put a hi or a hello into the chat room, just so we can see you've all found it. Cool. So it looks like everybody's there. So if you have got any questions or queries or anything you need to ask us, there are lots of moderators monitoring the chat room and they can jump in and help you. And Roxanne's our lead moderator today, so she'll be keeping an eye on everything that's going on there. Laura, back over to you.
Great. So we do just want to let you know that we're recording the session today. So that's everything that you see and hear will also be recorded so that we can send it out to you after the session. And just before we get started, as you'll have seen, you can receive a certificate of attendance if you stick with us for the whole session. So if you'd like one of those, it'd be really helpful if you could just pop your name into the chat room for us so that afterwards we can make sure we send certificates out to everyone who would like one. So I just want to take you through a little bit of what we're going to talk about today, and then we can get started. So here's a quick overview of the things we're going to cover. We'll be asking you some poll questions, all about student motivation, what we need to look at when it's motivating students, and how we go about improving that motivation. So we'll ask some poll questions to get the discussion going, and then we'll talk about those issues which most affect you. So before we launch into our first question, I just want to talk to you a little bit, really quickly, about why we're looking at student motivation. It's something that lecturers talk to us about an awful lot, and there's been a lot of research into from various institutions and lots of kind of research pulled together to look at the key issues in student motivation. Ultimately, we know that motivated students perform better. So what are the key challenges in motivating students, and how do we try to improve them? So that leads us really quickly and easily into our first question. Stuart's going to pop that up for you now. If you just take a few seconds to identify what you feel is the most challenging thing to motivate your students to do. If one of those answers isn't the one that kind of you feel is the biggest challenge, please do pop your comments in the chat room, and then we'll look at the kind of the most key challenge together. If you just have a few seconds to do that.
Cool, and I can see the voting going on, Laura. So at the moment there is a strong leader, so we'll share these results in a moment, as Laura said. So half of you have voted so far, so if you haven't picked an option yet, please jump in and select your choice, and we'll close the voting in a moment and share the poll with you. As Laura said, if you think there's something that's more challenging or that you find more difficult with your students, please add that to the chat room. Please let us know what it is, because we're always looking for interesting and other areas that we might want to look at. So let me give it a few more seconds, Laura.
Okay.
A few more people to vote. And I think everybody is going to vote as. So I'm going to end that poll now and share the results. So you should all be able to see the results
Okay.
on your screen now.
Great, thanks, Stuart. So that's really interesting, and also can see a few of you commenting in the chat room as well that getting students to read anything, whether it's the prescribed book or additional reading at all, can be a real challenge. It's something that has been challenging for as long as we've been teaching, and we know will continue to be so. So obviously the next step is going to be how you approach that with your students, because ultimately, you know, you need them to do some of the reading. They can't get through a course without reading something. So it'd be really helpful if we go straight to the next poll question, because that will give us then something to talk about in how we address getting students to engage and read what you want them to read. So can we move straight on to the next one?
There we go. So your next poll question is up. So what tools and approaches have you used to try and motivate your students?
So there's just while you're having a read of this question and thinking about the ways that you try to engage your students more, there's different options, and they can all be applied, we think, to trying to engage students with the reading. So there's lots of different ways to approach it as a problem. So it'd be really helpful to know if there's something which you have tried which isn't up there, or you're thinking about trying and would like to know what other people think. That would be really interesting to put in the chat room as well.
Okay, so you give it a little bit longer, Laura. Still waiting for a few people to jump in and select the option. Go. So if you want to vote, there's still time to jump in and share your opinion with us.
So a couple of questions about there only being able to choose one choice. So yeah, if you choose one that you think you've maybe used the most, or that you've thought about the most, and then we'll talk around some of the other options, and anything you'd like to comment on more in the chat room, we can focus on there.
Cool. So I think everybody's either voted or possibly dropped a comment into the chat room. So I'm going to end the voting there and share these results.
Great, thanks, Stuart. So looking at that one, it really seems to be the teaching styles which we should probably focus on talking about. That's something that we know got more and more popular recently. The flipped classroom kind of theory really works because students have to kind of engage in a different way, and kind of they can't do one without the other. It was interesting to see in the chat room, though, that a couple of comments about how it had been difficult depending on variation of student level and different work differently for different students. So if you've got any comments around that, that would be interesting to pull out in the chat room. If anyone's found it difficult to use across different levels and how you kind of approach that.
Yeah, Laura, I was just going to pick up, there was some interesting stuff in the chat room. So Dr. Martin Smith mentioned that he'd tried a flipped classroom model along with a more traditional teaching model, and the feedback from his students had been that they found the traditional model, they preferred that model. And Dr. Martin, I just wondered if you could share with us, so one of the things we saw from our earlier poll question is about getting students to read the text and engaging the students, whether either model you'd seen a greater engagement and motivation from your students to engage with the text, or whether one of them had been specifically worse. I think Dr. Smith getting lots of questions from the group, so we'll give them a moment to answer. I don't know if you'd spotted anything else in the chat room that you wanted to pick up on.
Yeah, so again, a couple more comments about the level. So Dr. Martin Smith saying we found it worked at a postgrad level, but undergraduate was difficult. Um, so just maybe making sure that the teaching style is kind of reflective of what the level of students demand. I think the comment that you picked out, Stuart, about students preferring the regular sessions is really interesting, because even if maybe they prefer those sessions, might they still have engaged more and read more of the textbook in kind of the flipped classroom sessions? It's not, maybe what they prefer isn't reflective of how much they're actually doing the reading that's been assigned to them. It might just be more enjoyable for them.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, the comment there about flipped classroom being a novelty, which only engaged students for a week or so. So they may not, they're coming at it in a different way. Obviously, you're coming at it as a teacher and trying to use it to get certain results. Students might just see it as kind of a 1 week that's a bit different, so engagement might shoot up then. But obviously, kind of the long-term goals are trying to improve motivation and a reading of that textbook overall.
Yeah. So I wonder if we could get a general thing. So maybe I've missed it in the chat room as a whole. So and obviously we've seen and some comments there around the whole flipped classroom model, and it appears that a fairly large number of people from our group, or a large percentage of our group, have tried the flipped classroom model. If you've already tried a flipped classroom model, could you just drop a comment in literally to say whether you feel that it's successful or unsuccessful? So if you've tried it, and you could just say whether you think it's successful or unsuccessful. I think it's an interesting area that we hear lots of talk about, the flipped classroom model and trying different models. I just wonder whether, as somebody said, it was a novelty that wore off quickly, or whether it is an effective long-term strategy for addressing student motivation.
So lots of completely different comments there. So really different experiences. Some people found it really successful, some people not, but overall it seems to be a question of durability. So how long, whether it's a long-term strategy or not, is an interesting one. And also a couple of comments about whether that kind of novelty effect might also apply to some of the digital content. I saw the chat rooms moving quite quickly, but I did see a comment there about having used some video, I think, and how that also kind of the novelty improves student motivation. But whether you can keep changing things, keep changing things up just to constantly try and keep that level of motivation high, I would imagine that would be a big challenge.
And I think that's a good point that's made there, is around how much work is required to implement some of these different teaching models and to come away from the more traditional teaching model. And I guess, and certainly from my experience, so just to put some context around this, I support customers from the UK through to South Africa and the Middle East, and looking at the sizes of classes and number of students that some courses are addressing, those models may be more appropriate for some classroom sizes than others. So I think there are lots of variables in there, and certainly for larger class sizes, from my experience in the institutions I've worked with, that the larger the class, the more effective, or the more value comes from investing in that time in updating courses and putting in additional materials. I just wonder if that's been the experience of some of the people today, is whether it really varies on the number of students that you're addressing, and the level. Because some people did comment that it worked better for postgrads than undergrads.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so basically backing up what you're saying there, Dr. Smith saying about how it worked with a small number of students, but obviously when we know that some of our customers have got very, very large class sizes, So looking at kind of other tools that you can use. And also something I wondered about this conversation is how you judge that. So what can be difficult is if you're saying, well, they liked the novelty, but after that, not so much. Maybe was that kind of improved attendance or improved outcomes from extra reading? I think it's a difficult one to kind of quantify student motivation. So whether you've got any kind of experience to talk about in the chat room where you've really kind of measured it in any way, that'd be interesting to talk about.
There was a piece Laura just picked up from Dr. Lindley saying they partnered Flip Classroom with a Twitter account and video material alongside 60 human biology students. I think Dr. Lindley, you said earlier that you did find it quite effective, although please correct me if I missed that.
Okay, yeah, so students attended well, but still wanted you to teach/lecture them. So even if it goes some way to improving motivation in terms of attendance or in terms of reading, there's still that expectation that you supply a kind of taught lecture to your students alongside any approaches and tools that you're using to improve things, maybe.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting that somebody said earlier, and I'm sorry I can't remember who it was from the chat room, said that they found that students weren't particularly interested in doing pre-lecture work or preparing for lectures, and I guess you could include that whether it be reading a textbook or engaging with an ebook or doing video material is our student expectations that they will come and be taught in a lecture environment, and is that still something that they're carrying over from school, or is it just a natural expectation? There was a question from James. I'm not sure if anybody in the chat room jumped in saying, can the flipped classroom work well for a large class, say 200 students? So I'm not sure if anybody had anything to add to that or an answer for James. From my perspective, James, just to, I mean, I don't teach, but I work with lots of institutions. I certainly have experience of lecturers in South Africa who I've worked with who successfully used the flip model with considerably more than 200, probably near 2,000, and found that it did work well, and that was integrated with using some digital resources and still using a traditional print textbook. So there was a real mixture there, but certainly expecting the students to come to lecture having completed some work and engage with some content. So I think from the experience I've seen, yes, that can work, but I'm not sure if others have jumped in and maybe commented on that.
There's an interesting comment from Geraldine about for early stage students that flipped classroom could be a bit isolating, maybe. So I did wonder if anyone had any comments on how to kind of make it more inclusive if you find that it can be difficult where you've got different levels of students. Some of them obviously will be able to run with it. Some students might find it more of a challenge. And then do you end up kind of splitting your class and motivating some while possibly leaving others behind? If anyone had any insight on that.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Laura. I think the implementation and how you roll out a different teaching model from that model that students have maybe experienced at school and higher ed and high school education before they come to university is maybe a real challenge, and that must be quite a change if you've been sat in a classroom and been taught in that more traditional model.
Definitely. And from
sorry, go ahead.
Well, just from some of the comments in the chat room, it sounds like most people, when they have used it, have still used it supported with lots of other types of teaching. So you would hope that that would kind of catch those students who might be better supported in a tutorial or in a lab, depending on the courses So yeah, basically what you're talking about now, where you've got that comment, it works well when you split the class into smaller groups and some agreement with that comment. Then maybe you've got the focus on some smaller individual groups, and you can make sure no one's getting left behind.
I just wanted just to pick up on something there, Laura. So just maybe to investigate that comment a little bit more about working well when you split the class into smaller groups. Can I just get a greater understanding of whether you're talking about physically into smaller groups in the sense of tutorial groups and having students in the same physical space, or would you see those smaller groups potentially as being online groups where you would be able to put students into groups where they can work together and engage using digital tools and create a closer relationship that way? So I'm sorry, I missed who added the comment, but when you talk about smaller groups, is that in a physical environment of having them together, or is that in more of an online area where you create those groups? It'd just be interesting to know how you were doing that.
I can just see they're typing now. Just while we wait for that comment to come through, it would be also interesting to pop in the chat room if there's any approaches that weren't covered in that poll question that you felt that you would like to share with some of the people attending today, something you might have tried or be thinking about trying. If there's anything else you want to pop in to the chat before we move on to another question. Sorry, Stuart. I think my chat's just frozen a little bit. So if you could just keep an eye on that for a minute.
Yeah, I was just going to go back. So Hans Schmitz just added a piece about improving independent learning of students, and I wonder if that's a piece that fits in here. So there's been quite a lot of chat today about students wanting more traditional learning styles and still coming to lectures and having that style of teaching, and whether that flipped classrooms, if they are done well and with the right support mechanism, create more independent learners, and whether that works, or whether you are just leaving students behind and failing those students. So I just thought it was an interesting point around independent learning, which is certainly something that I hear from lots of the lecturers I work with, is we'd like students to be more independent and to take some more responsibility for their learning, and whether that works.
Great. I think mine's up to date now because I've just seen that really interesting comment about using peer learning, which I guess is the same kind of independent motivation that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, I wonder with peer learning, somebody talked earlier about the levels of your students and their capabilities, whether does peer learning work across all levels, or is this again something that's more focused on your higher level students, and how does that work? So is peer learning something that you would use across all the levels and capabilities of students?
Great. So we've had quite a few different insights into different teaching styles and working with students in lots of different ways to motivate them more. I did just want to do one more poll question with you. I'm aware we are quickly moving to the end of our session. So something that, from chatting to lecturers and course leaders, something that very often comes up is actually how responsible they feel for motivating your students. We know it improves academic outcomes. We know there are lots of different pressures on teachers from their students, from managers at an institution level, at a course level. So we just thought it'd be a really interesting one to know how much kind of you feel that is something that you are directly responsible for. And any comments on that, please do pop them in the chat room, and we'll have a quick chat before we round up our session today.
Cool. So There is lots of voting going on. Hopefully we can get everybody to vote on this session. So if you haven't yet voted, please jump in and share your opinion with us.
Already a really, really interesting comment in the chat room that Dr. Lindley thinks the responsibility is ultimately with the student, which I guess is not necessarily covered that well in that poll question. We're assuming there is some responsibility on you and that. So interesting to kind of push it back that way.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Lindley. Yeah, please add your comments to the chat room as well. I think there are lots of thoughts and different ways you could go with this question. So jump in with comments as well. And if you haven't yet voted, please do. There's still lots of you who haven't taken your opportunity to vote, and we'd love to get your thoughts and opinion in here as well.
It's so interesting to see that everyone's kind of in agreement in the sense that students need to be willing to come so far. You know, you have to meet them halfway. If you don't have a student who's willing to engage, then there's only so much you can do to motivate them.
Sure. Okay, so unfortunately not everybody's voted, but I'm going to get in the voting there and share the results so you can all see them. So you should be able to see them now on your screen. And I think probably a reasonably the kind of split we would have expected. Laura, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think in combination with some of the comments that we've had today, you kind of really acknowledging that it's a challenge and it's something that you are taking quite seriously. That's something we see a lot talking to lecturers every day about the challenges they're facing, but that the students do need to be willing to engage in that process. Definitely, really interesting from Lisa. We have to provide a stimulating environment for students to learn in. That's a really interesting comment from Wendy as well, just to pick up on. I know we're really quickly running out of time. You've said that you need to develop a good relationship with your learners, because actually some of the research we looked at when we were looking into running this session was that one of the key factors in improving motivation was the relationship between the teacher and the learner, essentially. That's something that's been looked into in various studies, and we can always send the links out to those afterwards if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. So just now we're coming to the end of the session. It's been really great to get lots of opinions and interaction. I hope you found it really helpful and gained a few ideas on how to motivate your students and kind of where to go next with this kind of ongoing challenge. In order to make sure we're sending you the most relevant information that we're following up with, it would be really, really helpful if you could pop in to the chat room what learning management system you're using. I know a couple of people already mentioned Blackboard, a very popular one. If you're using that or something else, if you could just let us know, great. Thank you. A few comments there already. Also, if you would like to join any of our other webinars, we're running them, running more next week and also a couple of weeks after that. Roxanne is just going to pop the link in the chat room so that you can sign up to any of our other sessions. And we'll also be sending out the recording of today's session so that you can go back if there's some of the comments you want to look into a bit more, so that you can go back to it whenever you want. And obviously, if there's anything specific that you want to follow up on, as Stuart said, he works on all of our digital solutions and ways that we can use those to make that environment more engaging for your students with lots of tools ready for you to use, then do get in touch with Stuart on that one. But thank you very much for joining us. It's been a really, really interesting session.
Cool. Yeah, and thank you from me. As Laura said, more sessions coming up. So Roxanne's been sharing the links in there with you. If you are looking at using digital resources in any way in your courses and are looking for ideas or tools that might fit your needs, please don't hesitate to get in touch. So you've got contact details from this webinar, and I will stick my email address in the chat room in a moment. So we're always happy to talk to you about what you're doing and how we might be able to help or work with you. And thank you for all the comments and the engagement today. It's been a fantastic session. I feel like we could have done with more time, but sadly we are at the end of our session. Oh, my email
Thanks, everyone.
address is on the screen. Thank you.